Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan et kol darkav, lemo Yisrael ketavniot, lekol hadevarim, shabashamayim. Blessed are you, Lord our God, everlasting King, who has given all of his ways to his people Israel, as pictures of all things heavenly. You may be seated. Oh, I am dreading giving this teaching. Oh, how I am dreading giving this teaching. I mean, I shouldn't feel like that, but I do feel like that. And I just want to let you know up front, I am dreading giving this teaching. And the reason is that I don't even know why I'm teaching Scripture. God called me a long time ago to teach Scripture, and I was a horrible, horrible person. And he called me to teach Scripture while I was a horrible, horrible person, which makes no sense whatsoever. And then I went into Messianic Judaism, and one would think I'd get better, but that's not what happened. I pretty much stayed the same. And I kept teaching Scripture, and I kept learning, and I kept getting all this amazing revelation while I was a horrible, horrible human being. And some of you loved me even while I was a horrible, horrible human being, which I still don't get, but I'm thankful, I'm incredibly grateful for it, especially Eileen. I mean, I just can't believe she stayed with me. And what we're studying today, Tazria, the Torah portion Tazria, it has two parts. So you can see the big number 1, you're going to see the big number 1, and the big number 2. And we're going to look at the first thing and then the second thing. And I'm going to try to bring them together. But the second thing, what they call leprosy, every single rabbi, without exception, says that what we call leprosy, it's not really leprosy, which I'll explain. What they call leprosy, every rabbi says the same thing. It comes from Lashon Hara, which means Lashon, tongue, Hara, the evil speech, the evil tongue. Every rabbi, without exception, says this. Now, you don't always get 100% agreement with the rabbis about anything, but about this you do. That leprosy, what they call leprosy, comes from Lashon Hara. In our previous congregation, I told Eileen and my kids yesterday, you know how there was the Baal Shem Tov, master of the good name, and there were other rabbis who were called Baal something or other. Baal Teshuvah, master of repentance, Baal this, Baal that. I should be called the Baal Lashon Hara. I was the master of Lashon Hara, the evil speech. I was just so good at it. And it has taken me now 15 years to try to get rid of it. And I didn't even really start getting rid of it until about 7 years ago. Or maybe, well, I'll say 9. I'll be nice to myself and say 9. So this is what I'm going to be talking about today after we finish step 1. This is step 2. Now, step 1 is very strange. Step 1, it's called Tazria, which means the word for seed is zera. Say zera. Zera. It means seed. But this is about a woman. Seed of woman. So Tazria means to take seed. To have or to take seed. And this is a woman that it's talking about. And I learned in Messianic Judaism for over 20 years that women don't have seed. And you know how in Genesis chapter 3 it's talking about the Messiah and it calls him the seed of the woman. First time you ever see seed of woman, actually the only time you ever see seed of woman in the Bible. And so Messianic Jews naturally thought there's no such thing as a woman having seed. Absolute nonsense. I just learned. Absolute nonsense. Because the word Tzara'at, Tazria, means to take seed or to have seed. And this is the woman. So women do have seed. And that's what this Torah portion's about. All right, so let's read it from Leviticus 12. When a woman conceives, now translated in English as conceives, but it's not conceive. It's take seed, Tazria. When a woman Tazrias, when she takes seed, and then Yoled, births a male child, then she shall be unclean. Say tameh. Unclean is tameh, clean is tahor. Tameh and tahor. Tameh and tahor. These are the two words that Messianic Jews avoid like the plague, like leprosy. They avoid it like leprosy. They don't want to talk about unclean and clean. They don't want to read it. They don't want to think about it because Christ has done away with that. These are Messianic Jews I'm talking about. And I'm not trying to slam anybody, God forbid. I really mean that, even though I'm the master of the evil speech. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm not trying to slam Messianic Jews. But the simple fact is, I've been in it for 42 years. And I know what I'm talking about. That amongst the world of Messianic Judaism, they avoid these two concepts, tameh and tahor, like the plague. They don't read the rabbis about it. They don't read the Torah about it. They skip over this Torah portion for the most part, Tazria, for the most part. And they skip over next week's Torah portion, Metzorah, about the leper. Why? Because it's about clean and unclean. And they don't talk about that. They don't want to deal with it. But it's incredibly important because there's so much Bible about it. There's so many verses in the Bible about it. It comes up hundreds of times. But because there are a few verses in the New Testament that say that the Pharisees said to Yeshua, "Do you and your disciples wash hands before you eat? Or are you unclean?" And Yeshua answered them with whatever he answered them. That's where they go. They go to the New Testament instead of to our people, the sages, who God gave everything about himself to. And a big chunk of that is clean and unclean. Tahor and tameh. So it says, she shall be tameh for 7 days, as in the days of her menstruation. Now I'm going to show you just one tiny example. And it's going to take, I think, 10 pages, 10 slides to show you how important this is. And this is just one out of dozens and dozens and dozens that show us the kingdom and show us Yeshua. And it's talking about an unclean woman. That's what it's from. She shall be tameh. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin, the baby, shall be circumcised. And he shall stay in the blood of cleanness. Tahor is clean. Tahara is cleanness. And she shall stay in the blood of cleanness for 33 days. She shall not touch any set apart, any kadosh, any holy thing. Now what that means is, it does not mean what thousands of Hebrew roots people and Messianic Jews have said. If you're on your period, you can't come to services. That's not what it says. That's not what it's about. When it says a Kodesh thing, it's talking about the temple, being able to go up to the temple, go in the mikvah, and enter the temple precincts. There is no temple. So this does not apply in any way, shape, or form. It is a picture to learn from until it's the real thing reestablished on earth. Then you can do it for yourself. But until that time comes, this is not something you can keep. She shall stay in the blood of Tahara for 33 days. She shall not touch any set-apart thing, anything of the temple, of the tabernacle, nor enter the sanctuary. See, there it is. Nor enter the sanctuary. And we do not have sanctuaries. It's talking about the temple only. Until the days of her Tahara are completed. If she gives birth to a female child, it's different. She shall be tameh for 2 sevens. Unclean for 1 7 with a male, unclean for 2 sevens with a female. As in her menstruation. And she shall be in the blood of Tahara for 66 days. Twice as long. 33 for a male, 66 for a female. When the days of her Tahara are completed, she shall bring to the priest a 1-year-old lamb as a burnt offering, and a pigeon, a yonah, or a rock dove, a tor. That's how you say that in Hebrew. Tor, because that's what they sound like. And by the way, it's one word away in the Gesenius from Torah. Torah. It's basically the Torah bird. Pigeon is a yonah, a rock dove is a Torah. As a sin offering, then he shall offer it, and she shall be cleansed from the flow of her blood. But if she cannot afford a lamb, she's going to take 2 rock doves or 2 doves. The one as an olah, burnt offering, and the other as a chatat, a sin offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her, and she will be tahara. Now, what famous person in the Bible did this? Miriam. Thank you, Eileen. Mary. She kept the Torah? She was unclean? I thought she was pure. She was pure, undefiled, untouched by sin. She was unclean just like every other Jewish girl is unclean. For an exact amount of time, 33 days afterwards, plus 7 days, which is how long? 40 days. Now that's another picture that we're not going to talk about. And then 66 days for a female and 14 days for a female. So what's 66 plus 14? 80. That's for a female. That's also a picture, but we're not going to touch on that. We're only going to stick with the one picture we're looking at, which is when she takes seed and births a male child, she was unclean for 7 days. That's what we're looking at. Now, it continues. No, I'm sorry. We're now going to read the portion for number 2. It's 2 pages, so it's a lot. Then we're going to go back and we're going to talk about number 1, the woman giving birth to a male child. When someone has on the skin of his body a swelling, se'et, or a scab, sapchat, or a white spot / welt. It could be welt or white spot, which is a bacheret. And it becomes infection of Tzara'at. It's translated leprosy. It is not in any way, shape, or form leprosy. It's not like anything you've ever seen, which I'll show you. And it becomes an infection of Tzara'at on the skin of his body. Then he shall be brought to the Kohen. The Kohen shall look at the infected area on the skin of the body, and if the hair in the infection has turned white, and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is an infection of Tzara'at. When the priest has looked at him, he shall pronounce him tameh. What does tameh mean? What does tameh mean? Unclean. But if the bright spot, and it doesn't appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair hasn't turned white, then the Kohen shall isolate the infection for 7 days. Then he looks at it on the 7th day, and if in his eyes the infection hasn't changed, the infection hasn't spread, then the priest shall isolate him for another 7 days, 14 days total. And the priest shall then look at him again on the 7th day, and if the infected area has faded and the infection has not spread on the skin, then the Kohen shall pronounce him tahor. What does tahor mean? Clean. And he shall wash his clothes and be tahor. When a man or a woman has bright spots, bacheret, on the skin of the body, white bright spots, then the priest shall look, and if the bright spots on the skin of their bodies are a faint white, it's just eczema. Don't worry about it. That's what it says. That's what it means. It's just eczema. Don't worry about it. That has broken out on his skin. He's clean. He's tahor. As for the person who has the tzara'at, his clothes shall be torn. The hair of his head shall be loose. That's called wild hair in Hebrew, which means he cannot approach the temple because he has wild hair. He shall uncover his head down to his mustache and call out, how would you say this in Hebrew? Tameh or tahor? Tameh. That's what he calls out. Tameh. He shall remain tameh all the days during which he has the infection. He is tameh. He shall live alone. He shall live outside the camp. If a garment has a mark of tzara'at in it, whether it's a wool garment, what? If a garment has tzara'at, I thought Tzara'at was like a skin disease. Tzara'at can also be in a house, in the stones and the plaster of a house. Who ever heard of a cold or tuberculosis being in a garment or a house? So here's why I'm saying this, that in the Gentile world, they read the Bible and they go, oh, the priest is like a doctor, and he's checking this skin disease. Oh, we know what it is. It's leprosy. It's Hansen's disease. And the priest is like a doctor, and the doctor's going to heal him. He checks him, he prays for him, he goes off 7 days, he comes back, he prays for him again, he checks him again, goes off for another 7 days, and then he's clean. His skin is healed. He's a doctor. So if that were true, why doesn't it say in the Bible, if you have a horrible fever, go to the priest? It never says to go to the priest for any kind of physical ailment ever. Ever. Not one single time in the Bible. And that would be smart of God, wouldn't it, if it was about physical problems? Go to the priest and he'll heal your cold. He'll pray for you for your sore throat or your tuberculosis or your broken leg or whatever. It's not like that. This is not a doctor. This is a spiritual disease. It is a spiritual disease. And this is what all the rabbis say. You can't have a physical disease or ailment in garments or in a house. You can only have it in your body. So this has nothing to do with physical ailments. This is only about a spiritual disease. And here's the weird thing, guys. Leprosy is a miracle. And only the righteous get it. Yep. That's what all the rabbis say. That's what I'm going to show you. It is a miracle. It's a miraculous thing. And only the righteous people get leprosy. But in the Gentile world, we're told, oh, they've got leprosy. They're the bad guys. No, it's just the opposite. They're the righteous. That's what I'm going to show you. If a garment has a mark of Tzara'at in it, whether it's a wool garment or a linen garment, whether in linen or wool, whether in leather or anything made of leather, how do you give a cold to leather? If the mark is greenish or reddish in the garment or in the leather, it is a Tzara'at mark, and it shall be shown to the priest. So here's how it works. You have the person, and his body clothes him, and it has Tzara'at in it. But before it gets in his body, he has things that he uses, clothing that cover him, and it gets in that. But before it gets to that, it's in his covering outside his clothing, his house, or her house. And so that's why it can be in a house or in clothing, because those are his coverings, his house, his clothing, his body. Those are the coverings which can receive a spiritual disease. If he puts it in the house and God talks to him and says, you have a spiritual disease, and he doesn't listen, then it goes into the clothes. And God talks to him, and it goes into clothes, and he doesn't listen, you've got a spiritual disease. I don't want to hear about it. Then it goes into his body. It is a spiritual disease. All right, let's go back to number one. Number one is about Tazria. If a woman takes seed, if she has seed, and she gives birth to a male, and then she's unclean for how long? 7 days first. 7 days first. This is what we're going to look at. So what we want to know is, why is she tameh, unclean, for 7? Why isn't she unclean just a total of 40? Why doesn't it just say she's unclean for 40 days? But no, it says she's unclean for 7, then circumcise the baby, and then the rest of the time. So all we're looking at is the very first part. When a woman conceives, she takes seed and births a male, then she shall be unclean, tameh, for 7 days. Then on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. So why? What is this a picture of? This is a picture of giving birth. But not just giving birth to Israel. Now, those of you who have been with me for any amount of time, you already know what the birth pangs are. You already know what the day of the Lord is. And you already know that the birth pangs are the first 7 years of the day of the Lord. Okay, that works. The day of the Lord is 1,000 years long. It's not the coming of Jesus. It's 1,000-year kingdom, 1,000-year day. That's why it's called the day of the Lord. And there's hundreds and hundreds of passages about it. Very first part of that, the very first 7 years of that is called in Hebrew, Chevlei HaMashiach. Chevlei, birth pangs of the Messiah. And that's what she is a picture of. She has taken seed, and she's given birth to a male child. She is now unclean for 7. This is a picture of Israel, a woman, Israel. Not a man, Israel. Israel is a woman. God's bride, Israel. And she's taken seed, and she's now given birth to a male child, the Messiah. And immediately she becomes unclean. For how long? 7. 7 days. But it's a picture of the 7 years that Israel will be unclean. But at the end of that 7 years, what happens? The child is circumcised. The body of Messiah is circumcised. All right, so that's basically what we're looking at. So if you don't know what the birth pangs are, we're going to go through these very quickly. These are some of the main passages about the birth pangs. They are not all the passages about the birth pangs, just some of them. Isaiah 13, wail for the day. The what? The what? The day of the Lord. Not the time of the Lord, not the coming of the Lord, the day of the Lord. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. So all hands will fall limp, every heart will melt. They will be terrified. Pains and anguish will take hold. They will writhe like a woman in labor, like a woman in chevlei. They will look at one another in astonishment, their faces on fire. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming. Isaiah 21, a harsh vision has been shown to me. The treacherous one deals treacherously, and the destroyer destroys. Go up, Persia, lay siege. Let's go through the kingdoms that are in the scriptures, all right? First was Egypt that had Israel, tried to destroy Israel. And then who was the second one? Assyria, all right? Then come the big ones. Who destroyed Assyria? Who destroyed Israel and took Israel away into captivity? Babylon. So now we got Babylon. Who destroyed Babylon? Who attacked Babylon and destroyed Babylon? Medo-Persia. Good. Who destroyed Medo-Persia? Greece. Good. Who destroyed Greece? Rome. All right, so this, Isaiah 21, is talking to Babylon, saying, uh-oh, here comes Medo-Persia. They're going to destroy you, Babylon. That's what this passage is about. A harsh vision has been shown to me. The treacherous one deals treacherously, and the destroyer destroys. Go up, Persia. Lay siege, Media. Persia, Medo-Persia, laid siege against who? We just said it. Come on. Say it with words. Okay, let's go through it again. Assyria was after Egypt. Who destroyed Assyria? Who destroyed Assyria? Babylon. Who destroyed Babylon? Come on, everybody say it, please. Who destroyed Babylon? Medo-Persia. Who destroyed Medo-Persia? Greece. Who destroyed Greece? Rome. All right, so who's coming? Who is Medo-Persia going up to destroy? Babylon. Come on. Oh, wow. Babylon. Babylon. Okay. Whatever. I can't help you if you don't try. I really can't. I'm trying to teach you scripture, but you got to work with me. You got to try. You got to open your mouth and try. This isn't a church. It's not a church where you sit and have a guy talk to you. We're working this together. We're learning Judaism together. You want to learn the Bible, right? Well, you got to go to the Jews. You got to do it in a Jewish way. That's why we do it this way. So let's try again. You have Assyria. Who destroyed Assyria?
Babylon.
Say words. Say it out of your mouth.
Babylon.
Babylon. Okay, if you make a mistake, fine. That's fine. But at least you tried. Who destroyed Babylon?
Medo-Persia.
Good. Medo-Persia. Who destroyed Medo-Persia? Greece. Good. Who destroyed Greece? Rome. All right, so here, Medo-Persia is coming up to attack. Who do they attack?
Babylon.
Tell me. Babylon. So you're going to see over and over again. This is why I'm doing it over and over, because it's important. You're going to see over and over again that the birth pangs come at the destruction of Babylon. All the way to the book of Revelation, you're going to see this. That at the destruction of Babylon, that's when the birth pangs hit. Okay? Go up, Persia. Lay siege, Media. I've put an end to all the groaning that she, Babylon, has caused. For this reason, my loins are full of anguish. Pains have seized me like the pains of a woman in chevle, labor. I'm so bewildered I can't hear. I'm so terrified I can't even see. Isaiah 26, Lord, they sought you in distress. Now this word distress is tsar. It means trouble. It's what the church translates as tribulation. They should not translate it as tribulation. It's trouble. Lord, they sought you in trouble, in distress. They could only whisper a prayer. Your discipline was upon them. As the pregnant woman approaches giving birth, she writhes and cries out in her labor pains. That's how we were before you, Lord. We were pregnant. Who was pregnant? Who's we? This is Isaiah talking. Who's we? Israel. We, Israel. And when he says past tense, were pregnant, this hasn't even happened yet. It did happen in picture form when Assyria attacked. They went into birth pangs in picture form. It did happen in picture form when Babylon came and destroyed Jerusalem. They went into birth pangs in picture form. It did happen when Medo-Persia came and attacked Babylon. They went into birth pangs in picture form. But it hasn't happened for real. And it is going to happen for real. We were pregnant. We writhed in labor. We gave birth, as it seems, to wind. In other words, we're in birth pangs, but nothing's coming of it. It's just nothing's happening. But then immediately says something happens. We could not accomplish deliverance for the earth, nor were the inhabitants of the world born. And then it says, you're dead, boom, they'll live. It says, we couldn't do it. We couldn't bring deliverance. And then all of a sudden, deliverance comes. Your dead will live. Their corpses will rise. This is what the church, I don't want to slam anybody. You have to see what's right and what's wrong so that you can push what's wrong away from you. In the church, this is called the rapture. It is not rapture. It's Mechiyat Hamitim, revival or coming to life of the dead. There's no such word as rapture. That's a Latinized word. It's not even English, rapture. It's resurrection, which is Mechiyat Hamitim, coming to life of the dead. Your dead will live, their corpses will rise. You who lie in the dust, wake up and shout for joy. Wake up. Why would they have to wake up? Because they're asleep. When you die, you don't go to heaven. You sleep. I know what you're thinking, Eileen. Don't worry about it. Wake up and shout for joy, for your dew is the dew of the dawn, and the earth will give birth to the departed spirits. Come, my people, enter your rooms and close your doors behind you. Hide for a little while until indignation runs its course. So this is the birth pangs. This is the resurrection happening at the same time that the birth pangs come. Isaiah 66. A sound of uproar from the city, a voice from the temple, the voice of the Lord who is dealing retribution to his enemies. Before she was in labor, she delivered. So what it's making is, those of you who've had babies and it went on for hours and hours and hours, right? And you feel like it's just never going to end. In the birth pangs, that's how the Jews are going to feel, because it's 7 years long. But what God is trying to say is, it's just a little moment, is how it's called. In Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Hosea, a little moment. That's how it's described. And that's how he's trying to describe it here. Like, even before she was in labor, she delivered. Before her pain came, she gave birth to a boy. If she gave birth to a boy, that makes her what? Tameh. Close. Tameh. The good. You tried. That's what I want. Tameh. Unclean. She is unclean. And she's unclean for how long? 7. She gave birth to a male. Female is 14, male is 7. Yeah, good. So that's why it says before her pains came. This is telling us it's like coming out of the starting gate. It's just a little moment. Coming out of the starting gate, and she's unclean for 7 days. It's the birth pangs. Before she was in labor, she delivered. Before her pain came, she gave birth to a boy. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Can a land be born in 1 day? Now it calls it a land. First it calls it a male child. Now it calls it a land. Isn't that interesting? It's Yeshua and it's Israel. They're the same. They're exactly the same. Yeshua is exactly the same as Israel in every way, shape, and form. And here's another one where we can see that Israel and Yeshua are one. They're exactly the same. It gives birth to a male child, which is the Messiah, but also gives birth to the land, Israel. Can a nation be given birth all at once? As soon as Zion was in labor, she also delivered her children, plural. Shall I bring to the point of birth but not give delivery, says the Lord? Or shall I, who gives delivery, shut the womb? So, again, the birth pangs is what the church calls the tribulation. It is not tribulation. It's chevle, birth pangs. That's what it's been called for thousands of years. That's what it's called in Israel. The chevle HaMashiach, birth pangs of Messiah. And we know exactly how long it lasts, 7 years. Jeremiah 4, my soul, I'm in anguish. Oh, my heart is pounding in me. I can't keep silent because my soul, you've heard the sound of the shofar, the alarm of war. Now look at this. This is what one of the many passages Yeshua quotes in Matthew 24 about the coming of the day of the Lord, not his coming. The coming of the day of the Lord. Disaster upon disaster is proclaimed, for the whole land is devastated. I heard the sound of the shofar, the alarm of war. Disaster upon disaster is proclaimed, for the whole land is devastated. Although you adorn with gold jewelry, who do you think he's talking to? Even though you paint yourself up and you put on gold jewelry, who do you think he's talking to? Babylon. Babylon. This is Babylon. Although you adorn with gold jewelry, although you enlarge your eyes and with makeup, in vain you make yourself beautiful. Your lovers hate you. They seek your life. For I heard a voice as of a woman in labor, the anguish as of one giving birth to her first child, her firstborn child. The voice of the daughter of Zion, gasping for breath, stretching out her hand, saying, Oi, oi to me, I faint before murderers. So we have several things going on here. This is Babylon painting herself up so she won't get destroyed by Medo-Persia. And at the destruction of Babylon, the Jewish people go into birth pangs. When I say go into birth pangs, I mean they bend down, they grab their belly and put their head between their knees. And they freak out. Jeremiah 30. This is what the Lord says. I've heard a sound of terror, of fear, and there's no shalom. Ask now and see if a male can give birth. Can a male give birth? No. Israel's going to. And he asks this question on purpose so that you picture in your head a male giving birth. We know it's Israel. Ask and see if a male can give birth. Why do I see every man with his hands on his waist like a woman in childbirth? Not a woman, a man, because it's Israel. Back in the, what was that guy who would dance and he'd have those big baggy pants on, he'd go sideways. What was that guy? What was that guy? What was that? He's a rapper, and he would, when rap was first starting, he had big baggy pants, black guy, he was skinny, and he would dance like sideways, back and forth, and he had, say it, who? No, not Michael Jackson, he had tight pants. This guy had big baggy pants. Say it again? No, not Flavor Flav, he had a big giant clock. MC Hammer, that's it, thank you. MC Hammer used to have these big giant baggy pants. This is back in the 90s. At the same time that he was doing this, in Israel, now listen, this is verified. In Israel, they started selling big baggy pants like that. Had nothing to do with MC Hammer. They were called, I don't know how to say pants in Hebrew, I can't remember. They were called birthpang pants. You know why? Because the rabbis at that time, back in the 90s, were preaching, the birth pangs are coming now. And they all went, okay, let's get birth pang pants. And they turned it into like a fashion statement. But the truth is that the rabbis were saying back in the 90s that the birth pangs are here. Well, they're not here yet, but they're sure close. And so much so that they physically did this as a picture of the birth pangs. All right. So he says, why, and this is one of the verses that they would teach their people about, to do that. Why do I see every man his hands on his waist as a woman in childbirth? And why have all faces turned pale? Oi! For that day is great. There's none like it. That what is great? That what is great? That day. The day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is 1,000 years long. But the birth pangs are in the day of the Lord. And, you know, you look at, like, that's no big deal. That is a big deal. Most of the church teaches this. The coming of Christ and then the kingdom of God. No. There's no such thing. There's the coming of the Messiah at the end of the birth pangs. The resurrection at the beginning of the birth pangs. The birth pangs go for 7 years. We're already in the day of the Lord at that time. At the end of the birth pangs, the Messiah comes. And then will be the rest of the kingdom. But the kingdom starts Rosh Hashanah 6001. In about, 8 years, right around 8 years from now. 6001 at Rosh Hashanah. The birth pangs, the day of the Lord starts on the same day. This is what the rabbis have been teaching for 3,000 years. And it is a time of Jacob's tribulation, Tsar, Jacob's trouble. But he's going to be saved out of it. Behold, a people is coming from the north, and a great nation, and many kings. They seize bow and javelin. They are cruel and have no mercy. Their voice roars like the sea, like a man for the battle against you, daughter of Babylon. So here, who's coming? Who's coming to destroy Babylon? Who destroyed Babylon? Medo-Persia. So back then, in the past, Medo-Persia, he's prophesying that Medo-Persia is going to come like this giant swarm, and they're going to destroy Babylon. And in the destruction of Babylon will be the birth pangs. Let's see. Like a man for battle against you, daughter of Babylon. The king of Babylon has heard the rumor about them, and his hands hang limp. Distress has gripped him, agony like a woman in childbirth. Now, there are many passages that put Babylon in birth pangs, Medo-Persia in birth pangs, Moab in birth pangs, Ammon in birth pangs, Edom in birth pangs, Philistia in birth pangs. And I think that's it. And then Israel. 7 nations go into birth pangs. But it's Israel that gives birth to the Messiah, the male child. Hosea 13, 12, and 13. The guilt of Ephraim is wrapped up. His sin is stored up. The pains of childbirth come upon him. Who? Who? No, we're in Hosea 13. Who? Ephraim. Who's Ephraim? Israel. That's Israel. It's another word for Israel. Ephraim is Israel, northern Israel. The guilt of Ephraim is wrapped up. His sin is stored up. The pains of childbirth come upon him. He's not a wise son. It's not the time that he should delay at the opening of the womb. It's coming. You better do something. You know, ladies, you know about that. You know, that baby's coming whether you want it to come or not. You better do something. You better breathe and pant and scream and hit your husband or, you know, whatever you got to do. You got to do something. And then he says, shall I ransom them from the power of hell? What do you think the answer is? That's the whole purpose of giving the birth pangs and giving birth, that Israel will give birth to the Messiah. Yes, it's going to ransom them from the power of hell. And it's going to redeem them from death. That's why Israel goes into birth pangs, to give birth to the Messiah in the day of the Lord. Micah 4, 9 through 10. Now, why do you cry out loudly? Is there no king among you? Or has your counselor perished? That agony has gripped you like a woman in childbirth? Writhe and scream, daughter of Zion, like a woman in childbirth. It says it twice here. For now you will go out of the city, live in the field, and go to Babylon. Isn't that strange? All these verses and many people who are believers love to quote verses about come out from among her, come out from Babylon. I mean, I hear that all the time from believers. Come out of Babylon. True, come out of the paganism of Babylon. But in the day of the Lord, they're going to run to Babylon. That's why the birth pangs hit. Because it's there in their sinful association with the system of Babylon that God is going to redeem Israel. In other words, it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's what that means. Go to Babylon. There you will be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. And there's other details in this passage, by the way, that talk about their link with the false Messiah and their evil counselors, and birth pangs hits. Now, this you're familiar with, probably. Revelation 12. Now you should know what it's about. If you didn't already, you should now know what this is about. A great sign appeared, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, on her head a crown of 12 stars. This is Israel. This is from Joseph's dream, where he sees the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowing down to him, to Joseph. Well, who's the son? His daddy. Well, who's his daddy? Who's Joseph's daddy? Jacob. And the moon is his mommy. Who's his mommy? Rachel. And his 11 brothers are the 11 stars. Well, now Joseph's back in. There's 12 stars. So this is all of Israel. And she was pregnant. This woman, who is Israel, is pregnant. And she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. Now, I've heard believers, pastors, preach this. But they only preach from this. There's, 25 or 27 verses about the birth pangs in the Tanakh. I only showed you, 8, I think? There's something like 25 or 27 of them in the Tanakh. You don't teach from the end of the book, you teach from the beginning of the book so that you can know what the end of the book is saying. Now you should know what this is saying, but you cannot know what it's saying otherwise unless you see it in the Tanakh first. She was pregnant and she cried out, being in labor and pain to give birth. So she's in the Chevlei HaMashiach. Then another sign, a great red dragon having 10 horns, his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven. There's a huge mythology that's been around for almost 1,800 years that demons are fallen angels and that Satan had a war in heaven and 2/3 of the angels fell. That is pure mythology. That has not happened yet. That war in heaven does not happen until the middle of the birth pangs. The day of or the day after what's called the abomination of desolation, right in the middle of the birth pangs. That has not happened yet. And there's many verses that say that, by the way. All right, so it says, his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven. So that's going to happen in the birth pangs. The dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that as soon as she gave birth, she might eat up the child. And she gave birth to a son, a male, who is going to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. So you know it's the Messiah, yes? So Israel will give birth to the Messiah. What in the world does that mean? Do you know what that means? Like, there's already the Messiah. So big deal. Israel has not given birth to the Messiah yet. That happens in the birth pangs. But if you don't know what that means, it's like, who cares? Big deal. Do you know what it means that Israel will give birth to the Messiah? What that means is all of Israel will be saved. That's what that means. All of Israel will be saved. It hasn't happened. It's not, you can't even imagine. That means they're going to have Messiah in them, which they do not have in them. And all of Israel, from the greatest to the least, will have Messiah. But it happens in the most horrible time the world has ever known. The birth pangs. That's why there's birth pangs. So she gives birth to a son, a male, who's going to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Then the woman fled into the wilderness. The woman, being Israel, fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God. So there she would be fed, taken care of, for 3.5 years. So all of Israel will be saved in the birth pangs, and then for the next 3.5 years, they're hidden. So they get saved, all of Israel gets saved at the first half of the birth pangs. And then they're hidden. Now, while they're hidden, it's going to be hell on earth. Before they're hidden, it's hell on earth. But it's worse in the second half of the birth pangs than the first. But she's hidden for 3.5 years. When the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, see, that hadn't happened yet, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. All right, so here's a graphic of the birth pangs. The Chevlei HaMashiach. It's 7 years. It's at the first part of the day of the Lord. Day 7 in the 7 days of God. God has given mankind 7 days. Each day is 1,000 years long. So you can know exactly to the day, exactly to the moment when the day of the Lord starts. And you're supposed to know. And you're told over and over and over again, if you don't know, I got to back up. Wake up! That's what you're told if you don't know. And you're told that 8 times in the New Testament. Forget the Old Testament. In the New Testament, we're told 8 times, if you don't know when the day of the Lord is, wake up. That means you're asleep if you don't know. Revelation 12. She was pregnant, she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. So here it is. So at the very beginning of the day of the Lord, the year 6001, you have the first 7 years. She is unclean when she gives birth to a male child for how long? 7. 7 days. In this case, 7 years. This is why God set this picture up. This is why. It's not so that she can be unclean and people can shun her. Jews don't do that. Christians do that. Jews don't do that. Christians do that. There's no such thing as shunning in Judaism. That's a Christian thing that developed from 1300 to about 1600 and never stopped. Jews don't do that. There's a place outside the camp where the unclean go, period. When they're clean, they come back in. It's that simple. She's going out for 7 years. She's going to be out into the wilderness for 7 years to be unclean. The birth pangs have happened. She's given birth. She's now unclean for 7 days, in this case, 7 years. All right.
So at the end of the first 7 years,
She's unclean for the whole first 7 years of the day of the Lord.
shouldn't give birth until the end of the 7 years.
No, she gives birth in the middle of the 7 years of the birth pangs. But remember that verse in Isaiah? Before her pains come upon her, before she goes into birth pains, bloop, the baby's born. And I told you, it sets it up like that so that you can say, at the beginning, the 7 years of uncleanness happened. That's why that's there. So these 7 years of the birth pangs are her 7 days of tameh, of uncleanness. And then Messiah comes at the end of the birth pangs. Comes to earth, comes down to earth at the end of the 7 years. All right. Now, let's go to number 2. This is the part I don't want to talk about. I love talking about the birth pangs. I love it. That's like one of my favorite things because I can see it so clearly. And all the prophets I've ever met have been taken there, and they describe it to me. And I know it from the Bible, but I've never seen it. And all these prophets tell me, I saw this, and I saw this, and I have all these scriptures going through my head. I recognize what they're seeing. They don't know, but I know, because I know the birth pangs really well. I know them really well from Scripture, but I don't know them from experience. All prophets are taken to the birth pangs. All prophets. All. Kol. All prophets. And then they talk about what they've seen, and I'm like, oh, that's this verse, and that's this verse, and that's this verse. So I love the birth pangs. This I don't love talking about because it's about the mouth. And as I said, I have been the master of Lashon Hara, the master of evil speech. So let's go back to number 2. When someone has on the skin of his body a swelling, a scab, a bright spot, and it becomes an infection of Tzara'at on the skin of his body, then he shall be brought to the priest. Now, Tzara'at, there you can see it in Hebrew, Tzara'at, Tzadi Resh Ayin Tav, comes from Tzadi Resh Ayin Hey, Tzara'ah, or Tzadi Resh Ayin, Tzara, which is very strange because it's a hornet, a stinging hornet. So, like a hornet is Tzara'ah, and it's, you know what a hornet is, it stings, it strikes. And Tzara means to strike down, or a scourge, hence applied to diseases as, now this says epilepsy, prostration, I know what that is. But again, they're looking at it, Christians look at it like it's a physical ailment or disease. It is not. It's not. Hence, it's formed this and this and that. Okay, one stricken by God, one smitten. Come over here. One stricken by God, one smitten. Inasmuch as the plague of leprosy was regarded as being sent by God, as of course it really was, they got that right. But since there is such an affinity between the letters Tzadi and Gimel, in other words, they're interchangeable, I prefer regarding the leprosy to be so called from the idea of scabbiness. So you can see where he gets some of it and some of it he goes off the path because he's thinking physically. I'm going to show you what Jews say about it, what they've always said about it. And it's really super clear. It's spiritual. It is not physical. It is a physical manifestation of something spiritual. It's a spiritual affliction. Look at this. This is what the rabbis say. The plague of Tzara'at comes only as punishment for Lashon Hara, evil speech. That's from the Midrash Rabbah. It's from the Talmud, and it's from Rashi, all three. This is just a little short statement from the rabbis that sum up these things that are said in Midrash Rabbah, in the Talmud, and in Rashi. This is from Midrash Tehillim. That's the big stories from the book of Psalms. Evil talk is like an arrow. A person who unsheathes a sword can regret his intention and return it back into his sheath. But the arrow, you can't bring it back. You send out those evil words, they're out there. And there's nothing you can do about it. Now, I read these words and I feel horrible. Because I did this for 13 years as a Messianic rabbi. And, I don't know, 30 years before that, 20 years before that. And I got really, really good at it. And I was constantly sending out arrows. Can't bring them back. Why is the Metzorah? Now, Metzorah is what they call a leper. It means with Tzara'at, with leprosy. Why is the Metzorah different from all other ritually impure persons in the Torah? In that the Torah said, he shall dwell alone. Outside the camp shall his habitation be. It doesn't say that about anybody else who's tameh, who's unclean. It only says that about the Metzorah, the leper. He shall dwell alone outside the camp. That's where he'll live. Because with his gossip and slander, he separated a husband from his wife, a man from his neighbor. Therefore, the Torah said he shall dwell alone. He separated people, so he'll be separated. That's in the Talmud. Also in the Talmud, evil talk kills 3 people: the speaker, the listener, and the one who is spoken of. Guys, I didn't even hear what Lashon Hara was until I went into Temple Mount Sinai, a reformed temple, a reformed Jewish temple. I didn't even know what Lashon Hara. I never even heard the phrase Lashon Hara, and I'd been in Messianic Judaism for 23 years at that point. Never even heard the phrase Lashon Hara. There's something seriously wrong with that. Because in Judaism, in real Judaism, this is one of the biggest things. And they started talking about it in Temple Mount Sinai, and I was sitting there going, what the heck are you talking about? What are you saying? What is this? And then they start peeling away the layers of what Lashon Hara is, and I'm like, oh, no wonder we never talked about it. Because this is the one sin that we love more than anything. And I know this is true. It's better than chocolate. We love it. We love to speak Lashon Hara. And if you don't know what Lashon Hara is, it's not just slander. It could be true. It could be saying something true. It's slander. It's gossip. People gossip when they're praying, for God's sake. We need to pray for person A. All right. You know, let me ask you a question. Did you feel a pain right here? Yes? You know, I think, and then you start talking about what you think. That's gossip. We need to pray for my brother. He's out. Well, what's going on with him? Well, you know, what happened was, that's gossip. Talking about somebody who's not here with us is gossip. Sorry. They're saying this stuff in a reformed temple, and I'm sitting there just fuming. Like, no, come on. That's too harsh. But it's true. And they start peeling away the layers and showing me and showing at the Torah studies what this is about, and it's horrible. It kills 3 people when we do it. It kills the person who says it. It kills the person who hears it, just hears it, and the one they're talking about. And they're talking about this like everybody knows in Judaism, and I didn't know. And I'd been a believer, and I'd been doing Messianic Judaism, supposedly, for something like 23 years at this point. Maybe more. Now, this is from the Kahat Chumash. That means Kahat was the father of all the priests, the father of Aaron and all the priests. Kahat is the family of the priests. A Chumash is the first 5 books of Moses. So it's like a Torah, the Kahat Torah book. It's in the intro to Tazria. Tzara'at is not a disease with which we are familiar today. It's that simple. We don't know what it is. And it's not any natural disease that was known to humans. It was not any natural disease known to humans. Can you hear that? It's not a skin disease. It is a physical condition directly and miraculously resulting. Tzara'at, leprosy, is a miracle because it miraculously results from a spiritual flaw rather than one contracted by a lack of hygiene or exposure to a physical contagion or touching an unclean corpse or something like that. It's a miracle. There was nothing physical that happened that brought it. It was miraculous. You spoke something you shouldn't have. Now, here's what the rabbis say. You can believe this or not believe this, but this is what all of Judaism preaches with one voice. And they talk about Lashon Hara, I don't know why, with one voice. They all say the same thing. That only the righteous merits to get Tzara'at. That you have to be at a very high spiritual level for you to physically manifest just speaking Lashon Hara. Because everybody does it. So why doesn't everybody have Tzara'at? Don't we all do Lashon Hara? Yes? No?
Yes.
If I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Do you know anybody who doesn't do something wrong with their mouth? Okay, then everybody should have Tzara'at. Yes? But they don't. We don't. Thank God. Because only the very high spiritual people get leprosy, get Tzara'at. You got to be at a really high spiritual level because it's a miracle. That's what the rabbis say. Now, you can believe that or not believe that, but I think if you believe it, it'll start making sense to you how God set up the world and how we got to start really thinking about what we say and how we say it.
Is that why Moses did the leprosy in his hand?
Hold that question for a few minutes, okay? And then ask me again. The condition affects, this is from Kahat Chumash, but this is in the intro to Tazria Tzara'at. This is like once you're into the book and you're into the part about Tazria and you've gone a couple pages in and it's got a beautiful insight, this is where it's written. It's under the portion that says, develops out of a white dermal lesion. This condition affects individuals of otherwise sterling character. In other words, they're at a really high spiritual level. And moral excellence, who have committed some sin of slander, gossip, or arrogance, haughtiness. Do you know anybody who doesn't suffer from pride and arrogance? Anybody? Have you ever met anybody? The most humble guy I've ever met is Joe Good, and I want this on the film. The most humble man I've ever met in my life is Joseph Good. He's a Gentile, and he teaches the Torah better than anybody I've ever met. And he's a Gentile, and he's in outside of Houston. And he just does his thing. He doesn't worry about anything except teaching the scriptures. He's the most humble person I've ever met. And I've seen him prideful. Even he has squeaked out a couple of pride sayings, saying something in pride. Everybody suffers from this. So why doesn't everybody have Tzara'at? Because you have to be at a really high level. If Tzara'at appears on their bodies, it will appear on their heads if they're guilty of haughtiness, and elsewhere if they're guilty of gossip or slander. It is an entirely spiritual, miraculous condition, unrelated to any natural disease and with no physiological cause. Physiological means like something physical. All right? Now, all the rabbis say this. Now, when I'm giving you these passages from the Kahat Chumash, the Kahat Chumash takes all the sources of Judaism and distills them down into a nice little saying you can understand. That's why I give you these. This is all the sources coming down into one beautiful little insight. The Gemara asks, this is from the Talmud, the Gemara asks, is leprosy not an affliction of love? Didn't we learn if one has any of the 4 signs of leprosy, Tzara'at, they are nothing other than an altar of atonement. You hear what that's saying? That the leprosy is an altar of atonement. It makes atonement for what? For haughtiness and Lashon Hara. So they're struck with, like a hornet, struck with Tzara'at, and they see, oh, I'm arrogant, I'm haughty, I'm speaking Lashon Hara. Okay, I'm unclean for 7 days. I go off to the priest who checks me, put me in isolation. I dwell alone for 7 days to think about what I've done. I'm put in the corner to think about what I've done. And then I come back and the priest checks me. Yeah, you're okay, you got better. Go off again for 7 days and we'll see if you're okay. Go off again for 7 days, come back, checks me again. You're good, you're clean. How long did that process take? 14 days. Keep that in mind. And they're clean. Ask your question now.
So, at the burning bush,
At the burning bush, God told Moshe,
2 things. Use your staff, and it turns into a snake. The second miracle was he would put his hand in his garment. It would come, and it was
Come out, Snow White, with Tzara'at. And your question was, does that apply with Moses? Because it's a miraculous thing that only happens to somebody of high stature.
Yeah, he was the most humble man ever.
And he's the most humble man ever. You are dead on. Very good, Chris. You're dead on. It says in the scriptures he was the most humble man who ever lived, right?
Yeah.
Right? But he had Tzara'at. He had Tzara'at. God didn't have to do that with him, but he did it. He did it as a picture. Only the humble, only the righteous get Tzara'at because they sinned. All right, look at this. Numbers 12. Here's Moshe's sister. Miriam and Aharon spoke, and Aaron. Miriam and Aharon spoke against Moshe because of the Cushite woman, that means a black woman, whom he had married. And they said, has the Lord only spoken through Moshe? Hasn't he spoken through us too? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moshe was very humble, more than any who was on the face of the earth. Then the Lord came down and he called Aharon and Miriam. Why weren't you afraid to speak against my servant Moshe? And the anger of the Lord burned against them, and he departed. But when the cloud had withdrawn, Miriam was Metzorat. How come Aaron wasn't? Because he was lower than Miriam. Miriam was higher. All the rabbis say that Miriam was a greater prophet than anybody alive then except Moshe. She was the prophet's prophet except for Moshe. Aaron wasn't. Aaron was a person who sought peace and love. But Miriam was a great prophet. She was very, very humble and a very, very high moral character, even higher than Aaron. And so she got Tzara'at. She was a Tzara'at. She was white as snow. As Aaron turned toward Miriam, look, she was Tzara'at. And so Aaron says something stupid. Don't think that what he's saying here is Bible. It's not. It's not the Bible. It's stupid. He says something ridiculous here. He's not prophesying or anything like that. Aaron said to Moshe, "Oh, my Lord, don't let her be like a dead person." Now, that is true. Somebody who has Tzara'at is like a dead person. But then he goes too far. Whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes out of his mother's womb. And so, when you're watching the movie Papillon, I love that movie with Steve McQueen. He goes to a leper colony, and their fingers are eaten away, and their nose is eaten away, and their ears are eaten away, and their feet are eaten away. That's what people think leprosy is. And they use this verse to talk about it. He said something stupid. It is not that. It is not. That's called Hansen's disease. It is not Hansen's disease. That is not leprosy. But they call it a leper colony. It's unfortunate, but that's the way things are. So he says, Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "God, heal her, please." But the Lord said to Moshe, "Oh, relax. If her father had just spit in her face, wouldn't she be ashamed for 7 days?" So she's supposed to be unclean for 7 days. That's the picture. Don't freak out. She's all right. She has got leprosy. She's got Tzara'at. So she's unclean for how long? 7 days. And then she goes to the priest, gets checked. If it doesn't spread, she goes out for another 7 days, comes back, checks her again. She's fine. That's how it's supposed to work, Moshe. Relax. Have her shut up outside the camp for 7 days. And afterward, she can come back in. No problem. 2 Kings 5. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man, an ish ram, a great man. That doesn't mean he was rich, and it doesn't mean he was powerful. What it means is he's a great man. That means he was high moral character. And he's a Gentile. And he's the general in the Syrian army. He's a pagan. He was a great man in the eyes of his master, and eminent, high, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram, Syria. The man was also a valiant warrior, but he was afflicted with Tzara'at. So we know that he's a man of high moral character. This is miraculous. He's got Tzara'at. And what happens is, when they had invaded Israel, they got this young maiden from Israel, and the young maiden from Israel says, "Oh, I wish you could go to the man of God, Eliyahu, I think it is. Because if you go to Eliyahu, he can heal you if you're at Tzara'at." And Naaman says, "Yeah, let's do that. I'll bring a bunch of money, and I'll go honor him, and he'll heal me of Tzara'at." So what happens is, right here, it doesn't happen like he thinks. Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times. That's what the prophet says. Go and dip in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you'll be tahor, clean. How many days are you supposed to be out? 7. You're unclean for how long? Come on. 7. Well, first 7. Well, that's why he says dip 7 times. And it's in the Jordan, which ain't much of anything. And Naaman was furious, and he went away and said, I thought he'd come out and he'd stand, he'd call on the name of Yehovah, his God, and wave his hand over the site and cure the Tzara'at. He thought it would be like a big, show. Aren't Avanah and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, not better than the waters of Israel? I mean, we got better waters than that. Why don't we do it there? Couldn't I wash in them and be clean? So he turned and he left in a rage. Then his servants approached and said to him, "My father, if the prophet told you to do some big giant thing, wouldn't you have done it? How much more if he just tells you to go dip in the Jordan 7 times? What's the big deal?" And so guess what he does? He goes, "Okay." And then he goes, "I want to honor this guy. I really want to honor him." And his servant Gehazi hears it. And he kind of he gets in between him and Eliyahu. Eliyahu didn't want anything from him anyway. But he goes and he says, what were you going to give my master? Well, I was going to give him all this gold and silver and clothing and all this and everything. I'm going to give him all kinds of stuff. And Gehazi says, "Give it to me. I'll get it to him." But he doesn't get it to him. He keeps it for himself. And what happens is Eliyahu, I'm sorry, I keep making that mistake. Eliyahu says, without hearing Gehazi or seeing Gehazi, Gehazi comes in the house and he goes, "Hey, did you get the stuff?" What? What do you mean? You know, it's not time to be getting stuff. That's not what we're about. And unfortunately, now the leprosy, the Tzara'at that was on Naaman is going to cling to you and your children forever. It's never going to leave. That's sad. But it tells us something about Gehazi. He was of high moral character. But it's unfortunate. This is 2 Chronicles 26, when Uzziah, the king, became strong, his heart was so proud. Now remember, the rabbi said that Tzara'at comes from Lashon Hara and from arrogance, pride. And these are the verses that give them this understanding. When Uzziah became strong, his heart was so proud that he acted corruptly, and he was untrue to the Lord his God, and he entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Not only was he not a priest, he was not in the right course of priests. He didn't, there's a million things he did wrong. Only the people could burn the incense that were chosen by lot. They didn't throw lots to choose him. He wasn't allowed to touch the holy machta, the holy fire pan. He wasn't allowed to wear priestly garments. He wasn't even allowed to be in the holy place. He broke the law in so many ways. And he's going to go in there and burn incense. Then Azariah the priest entered after him, and with him 80 priests of the Lord, and they opposed Uzziah the king and said to him, "It's not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the Kohanim. Get out of the sanctuary. You've been untrue, and you're going to have no honor from the Lord God." Now this takes guts for them to do this. Even with 80 guys, it takes guts. But Uzziah, with a fire pan in his hand, a machteh in his hand for burning the incense, was enraged. And while he was enraged, bam! Tzara'at broke out on his forehead. Where does it show up if you're arrogant? On your head. Before the Kohanim in the house of the Lord. And they saw it, and Azariah now, it's a miracle. It just like that, it popped up. It didn't develop over time like a skin disease. It just pop, showed up. Isn't that cool? It's a miracle. And they saw it, and they're like, "Oh my God, get him out of here." Azariah, the chief priest, and all the priests looked at him, and look, he had Tzara'at in his forehead. And they quickly removed him from there, and he himself also hurried to get out. King Uzziah was Metzorat to the day of his death. It's sad. And he lived in a separate house, afflicted with Tzara'at, because he was cut off from the house of the Lord. I don't know if I should say this or not, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say it. But I'm going to say it because I feel it, and if I'm wrong, God can correct me. I think that I have been cut off from the house of the Lord. I did Lashon Hara for at least 30 years. At least. And, there's a few of you sprinkled here and there. But it's always been like this for me. It's always been very, very few people. It's always been very little, very small, very tiny. And I think it's probably because of that. because, well, I'm not saying I'm of high moral character. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I haven't gotten leprosy. I haven't gotten Tzara'at because I'm not of high moral character. You're safe. So, but I think that God has done this with me. I think that God has put me out. I don't know how long it will last. I don't know if it will be for the rest of my life. But I know this. I put into people to do Lashon Hara. And I just received a letter yesterday that confirmed it. There was a guy who was in our first congregation. Let me paint a picture of this, okay? In our first congregation, we would make fun of everybody. They wouldn't. Everybody was afraid to do it. I would do it. Make fun of everybody, like Donald Trump did. Crooked Hillary. That's Lashon Hara. Sleepy Joe. That's Lashon Hara. I had a nickname for everybody. I would come up with these, I thought I was so clever. I'd come up with these nicknames, and then I had everybody else around me do it. I taught them how to do it, and they were all laugh. Ha, ha, ha. It's so funny. And that would be the person's, that's how we look at the person. It was disgusting. It was horrible. I received a letter from a guy who was in my first congregation, and he said, how is the jock and his succubus, meaning his wife? How is, what was the first one? He had a couple other names that we had called people, that I had called people. Or if I didn't, I influenced people to do it. Because I thought it was funny. I thought it was fun. It like brought people down off their high horse and all. I had all kinds of reasons. Stupid. And I'm like, this guy hasn't talked to me. Well, I haven't seen him in 20 years. I literally have not seen him in 20 years. And he still has that in him from me. Now, I'm learning how to change. I'm being positive now. I'm speaking good. If I don't have something good to say, I usually won't say much. Because I don't want to do Lashon Hara. I hate Lashon Hara. That was taught to me, thank God, by a Reformed temple. Jews who don't believe in Yeshua. Think about that. So I'm trying. I'm really trying. And yesterday, I was, my daughters, it was so funny. My two daughters and my wife were up on the second floor, and I was going down the stairs, and they were all lined up there looking down at me. And Davida, my middle daughter, she saw that I looked sad. And she goes, Dad, what's wrong? And I said, I told her about the letter, and I said, I've done the Lashon Hara for so long that, I should be called the Baal Lashon Hara, the master of Lashon Hara. And I said the three examples that this guy said in the letter. And I got down to the bottom of the stairs, and I'm talking as I'm going down the stairs. Then I go away from the stairs, and they go, word, in unison. And I'm thinking they're saying, yeah, word, that's right, that's you. And I go, word? And they go, no, were, you were that. And I'm like, oh, okay. You were that. You're not that anymore. Past tense. Maybe. But, I read these verses and it's bad news. Bad news. So for the one who does Tzara'at, who does Lashon Hara and gets Tzara'at, this is what they're supposed to look like. As for the person who has the Tzara'at, his clothes are torn. Hair of his head is wild hair, loose, and he shall cover his head down to his mustache and call out, unclean, unclean, and he shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. He's tameh, he's unclean. So in the Kli Yakar, this is an amazing book, It says, his hair shall grow long. He's commenting on this phrase, his hair shall grow long. He shall have wild hair. This is to atone for haughtiness of spirit, because he wanted to be the head over everybody else. I read that and I'm like, OMJ. Oh my Jehovah. That's me. I mean, I look at that and I'm like, oh my God. I mean, that's me. That's who I used to be. I wanted to be the head over everybody. I never would say that, because that don't sound good. But that's the truth. To atone for his haughtiness of spirit, because he wanted to be the head over everybody. His garments shall have a tear in them, to atone for stinginess, because miserly people generally have torn and patched clothing. He must cover his head down to his upper lip, and to atone for the sin of the speech that he spoke with his lips. He shall call out, Tameh, Tameh, because somebody who besmirches others with his speech shall be called unclean as well. For the reason he besmirched them is that he certainly found his own faults in them. He saw the fault in them, and so he picked on it, picked at it. And that's what I did. That's absolutely true. These are incredibly deep and amazing words. And here's the bottom line. If you wish to guard yourself against being stricken with leprosy, don't speak bad about other people. Remember what was done to Miriam, who spoke slander against her brother and was stricken with Tzara'at. This goes even to politics, and I'm sorry, but it does. You are not allowed to slam the leaders of this country. You're not allowed to. It's Lashon Hara. It's not politics. It's not their economic, political belief system. It's your opinion of their character. If you say, oh, Joe Biden, our president, he's an idiot, that's Lashon Hara. It is. I'm sorry, it is. Even if it's true. Even if it's true, it's Lashon Hara. Because Lashon Hara, unfortunately, extends to what could be true. And who are you to say who's an idiot anyway? Who am I to say who's an idiot? We've all got our own way we judge stuff, right? So it even goes to politics, unfortunately. And you're going to have to really think about this. And this is what the wisest Messianic Jew, Messianic rabbi, ever said about this. There's nobody wiser who ever said anything wiser, including Yeshua. This is Yeshua's brother. He was the head over the Messianic congregations in Jerusalem. He was called by the unbelieving Jews of his time, Yaakov HaTzadik, Jacob the righteous one. In other words, Jacob the man who had no sin. And guess what they did? They beat him to death. But so what? This is what they called him, because they recognized the wisdom that was in him. And this wise man said this: we all stumble in many ways. Oh God, is that true? If anyone doesn't stumble in his tongue, in his lashon, in his mouth, he is an ish tam. He's a perfect man. Who was the only one in the Bible who's called an ish tam? No, not Moses. No, not Aaron. Not Noah. He's not called an ish tam. Jacob is not called an ish tam. No, not Enoch, not Abraham. No, not Enoch. Wow. I thought you'd get this one quick. Jacob. When Jacob was born, remember, Esau was called an ish hasadeh, a man of the field, a man of the world, and Jacob was an ish tam, a perfect man. A perfect man. So, if you can tame your tongue, you can be like Jacob, like the Jews. Jacob is Israel, right? And that's what he's saying. If anyone doesn't stumble in his words, he is Israel. He's Jacob. He's an Ishtam. If we put the bits into a horse mouth, then they submit to us and we direct their whole body. Look at the ships. They're huge. They're driven along by gigantic winds. But they're directed by a tiny little rudder, according to the inclination of the pilot. So also the tongue is a tiny part of the body, but it boasts gigantic things. Look how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. In the Bible, what are trees? People. So that's what it's talking about. It's not talking about a forest fire. It's talking about a fire amongst humans. Trees are people. People are trees in the Bible. See how huge a forest of people is set on fire by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, the very world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our body's parts as that which defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of our life. And it's set on fire by hell. Nobody can tame the tongue. Nobody. So then why doesn't everybody have Tzara'at? No, because it's a miracle. It's a miraculous thing. And only those of incredibly high moral character get it. It's a miracle. And God is very gracious so that he doesn't do that. Nobody can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil. It's full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who've been made in the likeness of God. And I'm sorry to tell you, politicians, whether you like them or not, are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come both blessing and cursing. My brothers, Israel, and sisters of Israel, these things should not be like this. Now, the whole concept of the body of Messiah is a myth. The whole thing is a myth. There's no such thing as the body of Messiah the way the church talks about it. But there is very definitely a body of Messiah. It's from Isaiah chapter 1. It's Israel. That's all there is to it. It's Israel. And God, in his incredible kindness, grafted some Gentiles into that. Isaiah 1, 4 through 6. Sons who act corruptly. They've abandoned the Lord. They've despised the Holy One of Israel. They've turned away from him. Where will you be stricken again? Stricken again. Like a hornet. As you continue in your rebellion. The entire head, it's talking about a human body. The entire head of Israel is sick. There's nothing healthy in it. I'm sorry. The entire head of the body is sick. The entire heart in the body of Israel is faint. From the sole of the foot of what? A body. A body. This is where the concept of the body of Messiah came from. It's a body. Israel is a body, a human body. From the sole of the foot, even to the head of the body, there's nothing healthy in it, only bruises, and guess what it says? Habura. It's the same word as a white swelling of Tzara'at. It's the same word. Tzara'at covering everything. By the way, it says in our Torah portion that if the Tzara'at covers the entire body from the head to the foot, the person is, guess what it says? Clean. Clean. Not unclean. Clean. Isn't that strange? There's nothing healthy in it, only bruises and bright spot welts and raw wounds, not pressed out or bandaged or softened with oil. The whole body, the Messiah, the body of God, Israel, has Tzara'at. So, what's the purpose of the birth pangs? The purpose of the birth pangs is to heal Israel so that they become clean. to give birth to the Messiah in Israel, and then after 7 years in this case, she is clean. He is clean. She is clean. Ezekiel 36, I will take you from the nations and gather you from all the lands, and I'll bring you into your own land. Has that happened yet? No. And I shall sprinkle upon you cleansing waters, and you shall be tahor. What do you do with the leper, the Metzorah, after they are checked by the priest and they're pronounced clean? They go in the waters of cleansing. Huh? Mikvah, yeah. Zechariah 13:1. In that day a fountain will be opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and for uncleanness. So what makes Israel unclean? What makes a person unclean in the Bible? Nidah, seminal emission. Nidah is a woman's period. Or after having sex, a woman is nidah. And a man is unclean. Both man and woman are unclean after sex. Did you know that? Every single time, without exception. You're nidah. You're called nidah. And by the way, this verse in Zechariah 13, the very word here, for sin and for uncleanness, guess what uncleanness is there? Nidah. Yeah. And it's for the whole house of Israel. So what makes us unclean? Nidah, or seminal emission. Unclean animals, touching their bodies or eating their flesh or whatever. Birth of babies, Tzara'at, and death. Those 5 things. That's why you go in the mikvah, for those 5 things. And in the day of the Lord, Tzara'at being one of them, it's going to be 7 years, and then they'll be clean. We'll be clean. All right, so the whole body of God is healed of Tzara'at in the day of the Lord. That's what the purpose of the end of the birth pangs is for, and the coming of the Messiah. Matthew 8. Now, this is weird. You're going to have to look at this totally different. When Yeshua came down from the mountain, a man with Tzara'at, what does that tell you about the man? He's a righteous man. He's of high moral character. By the way, when Yeshua was talking, one of the things he said was, there were many, many Metzorah. There were very many lepers in Israel during the time of Elijah. But only one of them got sent, and he got mad. Well, what does that tell you about Israel during the time of Elijah? There were many, many righteous people. When Yeshua came down from the mountain, a man with Tzara'at came to him and bowed down and said, Lord, if you're willing. This is weird. This is weird. Don't think like, oh, it's a demigod and a semigod, like one of the Greek gods who, if he wants to, he can make me clean. That is mythology, and it's disgusting. It's idolatry. This is a rabbi, a Jewish rabbi. Why would a person come and get down in front of a rabbi and say, if you want to, you can cleanse me of Tzara'at? Is that possible? Aren't you supposed to go to the priest, get checked, go away for 7 days, come back to the priest, go away for 7 more days, and then go back to the priest? Yes? 14-day process? But he says, if you want to, you can clean me like that. How is that possible? This is what rabbis did. They're called tzaddikim, righteous holy men. And they could heal Tzara'at instantaneously, just like Tzara'at can show up instantaneously. They can heal it instantaneously. Only rabbis can do this. Only tzaddikim, righteous men, can do this. If you're willing, you can make me tahor. But I thought he had to go through a 14-day process. Yeshua reached out his hand, touched him, saying, I'm willing. Be tahor. And then what does he tell him to do? Don't tell anybody I did this for you. That's what he says. Don't tell anybody I did this for you. Immediately his Tzara'at was cleansed, and Yeshua said, you see to it that you don't tell anybody about this. But immediately go show yourself to the Kohen and present the offering that Moshe established as a testimony to them. So he's telling him, okay, you're clean. Now go show yourself to the priest and go through the process, because it's a picture. It's a testimony. And I want that testimony. I want it. I want the picture. Don't tell anybody I did this. You get what I'm saying? Guess what he did? He immediately went and told everybody. But then he went to the priest. Now, Jacob 3:2-12 says, we all stumble in many ways. If anyone doesn't stumble in what he says with his mouth, he's an ish tam. This is what we're shooting for. I am now shooting for this. And I need you to hold me accountable. I'm really, really good at making fun of people. I'm sarcastic, and I can make 4 turns before you even know what I've said. I can go 4 different directions before you even know where I am. I'm really good at it. I trained myself to be good at it. It's disgusting. It's a horrible sin. And I don't want to do it anymore, and I'm trying really hard not to do it. So I need you to hold me accountable. But I'm going to hold you accountable too. No more making fun of Joe Biden. I'm not going to allow you to do it, not with me. No more making fun of liberals. Sorry, it's Lashon Hara. I'm sorry. But I'm going to hold you accountable as best I can. I'm not going to be mean about it. I'm not going to be cruel about it. I'm just going to hopefully gently remind you that we can't do Lashon Hara and think that we're going to be okay. This place should be packed. This place should be packed, but it's not. It's not because of you, it's because of me. But I'm trying. I'm trying. So, we all stumble in many ways. We gotta try harder not to stumble in Lashon Hara. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much that you haven't hit me with Tzara'at, and you haven't hit other people I know with Tzara'at. And you've been very gracious, you've been very patient. And I ask, Lord, I ask you for your forgiveness for Lashon Hara, for years and years of baked in Lashon Hara. And Lord, I just ask that on this congregation that spirit of arrogance, haughtiness would just be smashed and destroyed and broken, and would not have any part in this congregation, and that spirit of thinking we're better than anybody would have any part in this congregation. And Lord, I ask, Father, that we would speak well of people, and that you would show us things to say that are speaking well of people. I ask that you train us, Lord, gently train us, in the name of Yeshua. Thank you for your grace, your chen. Amen. Shabbat shalom. Let's come down here and do Kiddush, please.